Welcome to my channel. Before moving on to the stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Good listening. First story, The Midnight Passenger. It had been a long day, and all I wanted to do was get home. The city lights blurred as I drove, the clock on my dashboard reading 11:47 p.m. I had picked up a few late-night Uber rides to make some extra cash, but I was exhausted. Only one more ride to go, and I was done for the night. Just as I was about to switch off the app, a notification popped up for a pickup about 10 minutes away. The name was simply E. No last name, no profile picture. I hesitated, but it was close, and I was already in the area. I accepted the ride. The address led me to a quiet, dimly lit street on the outskirts of the city. As I pulled up to the location, I noticed there were no houses, no stores, just an old industrial area. My headlights illuminated a figure standing under a flickering street lamp. The person was tall, wearing a long black coat with a hood that concealed their face. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I tried to shake it off. I had picked up plenty of weird passengers before. This was just another late-night ride. I rolled down the window and called out, "You here for the Uber?" The figure didn't respond, just slowly walked toward the car. They opened the back door and slid in, the hood still obscuring their face. The air inside the car seemed to drop several degrees. I glanced at the rearview mirror but could barely make out their features in the darkness. Something about the silence felt off, but I tried to stay professional. "Where to?" I asked, hoping to get this ride over with quickly. A raspy, almost whispering voice replied, "Keep driving. I'll tell you where to go." I didn't like that answer at all, but something in the tone made me uneasy, so I started driving. I couldn't pinpoint why, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The streets grew quieter as I drove deeper into unfamiliar territory, away from the city and into more isolated areas. Every now and then, I'd glance at the rearview mirror. The passenger remained eerily still, not saying a word. I could barely hear them breathing. After what felt like an eternity, the voice spoke again. "Turn left." I followed the instructions, my heart rate increasing. We were now driving through a thick, wooded area. No streetlights, no houses, just trees on either side of the narrow road. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the crunch of gravel beneath the tires. "Stop here," the voice said suddenly. I hit the brakes. We had stopped in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing but darkness ahead. My heart pounded in my chest, and I had no idea what to do next. I turned around, finally wanting to get a good look at this person, but the back seat was empty. I froze, my mind racing. The passenger, who had been right behind me moments ago, was gone. I hadn't heard the door open, hadn't felt any movement. It was as if they had just vanished. Panic set in. I quickly checked the back seat again, this time more thoroughly, but there was no trace of anyone ever being there. My mind reeled. I knew I hadn't imagined it. Someone had been in my car. I had felt their presence. I had heard their voice. I fumbled for my phone to check the Uber app, desperate to find some sort of explanation. Maybe I had picked up a prankster, or someone had somehow slipped out without me noticing. But when I opened the app, there was no record of the ride. No trip history, no passenger by the name of E. I sat there for a few moments, paralyzed with confusion and fear. My hands trembled as I started the car again, eager to get out of that place. I drove back toward the city, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds, terrified that the passenger might reappear. When I finally made it home, I locked every door and window, my mind still racing. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that exhaustion was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew something had happened. To this day, I don't drive late at night anymore. Every now and then, though, when I pass by that old industrial street, I can't help but glance at the flickering street lamp, half expecting to see a figure standing there, waiting for a ride. Second story, The Neighbor's Window. I recently moved into a small apartment on the second floor of a quiet, older building. It wasn't anything fancy, but the rent was cheap, and the neighborhood seemed safe enough. There wasn't much activity, mostly older residents, except for the woman who lived directly across the courtyard from me. I didn't know her name, but I'd see her from time to time through her window. At first, it was nothing out of the ordinary, just her reading or watching TV late at night. I didn't think much of it. She always had her curtains half open, and occasionally, I'd catch a glimpse of her standing near the window, looking out into the night. Maybe she was just lonely. I didn't mind it really, until the night things took a strange turn. It was a Friday night, and I had come home late from work. Exhausted, I dropped my bags and collapsed on the couch. I glanced across the courtyard and saw the woman in her usual spot by the window. Her silhouette was framed by the dim light of a lamp. She was just standing there, looking out into the darkness. But this time, she wasn't moving at all. I watched for a moment, wondering if she had fallen asleep standing up. After a few minutes, I shrugged it off and turned on the TV to distract myself. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop glancing back at the window. She was still standing there, motionless. A cold feeling crept up my spine. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing. People do weird things, right? Maybe she was just lost in thought. I decided to stop looking and went about my night. But when I got up to grab a glass of water, I made the mistake of looking out the window again. She had moved. Now she was standing closer to the glass, her face just inches from the window. I could barely make out her features in the dim light, but something about the way she was standing felt unnatural. She wasn't looking out into the night anymore. She was looking directly at my window. I froze. My heart started racing as a million thoughts ran through my mind. Was she watching me? Had she been watching me this whole time? I quickly pulled my blinds shut, trying to shake off the unease. But the feeling of being watched lingered. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the apartment, every rustle of the wind outside made my skin crawl. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just a coincidence. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next day, I decided to avoid looking at her window altogether. I focused on my work, trying to keep myself busy. But that evening, as I was getting ready for bed, curiosity got the better of me. I peeked out from the edge of the blinds, just for a second. She wasn't there. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Maybe she had finally gone to bed. Maybe I had just imagined everything. But as I turned away from the window, something caught my eye. A faint reflection in the glass. I whipped around, my heart pounding in my chest. She was standing in her window again, but this time, her face was pressed against the glass, her hands flat against the window pane, staring directly at me. Her eyes were wide open, unblinking. I staggered back, pulling the blinds shut so quickly I nearly tore them down. My mind was racing, and I didn't know what to do. Should I call the police? What would I even say? My neighbor is staring at me through her window? It sounded ridiculous, but something about her eyes, those wide, empty eyes, sent a chill down my spine that I couldn't ignore. I tried to calm myself down, convincing myself that it was just some bizarre coincidence. Maybe she didn't even realize I was there. The next morning, I avoided looking at her apartment. I left for work earlier than usual, keeping my head down as I passed by the courtyard. I couldn't stop thinking about her, though. What if she was still there, standing at the window, watching? That night, I made a decision. I was going to confront her. I had to know what was going on. I wasn't the type to let fear get the best of me, and I wasn't going to live in paranoia anymore. I waited until it was dark, then walked across the courtyard to her building. My heart pounded in my chest as I climbed the stairs to her floor. When I reached her door, I hesitated for a moment, then knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still, nothing. I tried the doorknob. It was unlocked. The door creaked open, and a wave of stale air hit me. The apartment was dark, the only light coming from the dim glow of her lamp by the window. I stepped inside, calling out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" Silence. I walked further in, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. The place was eerily quiet, as if no one had lived there for years. As I approached the window where I had seen her standing night after night, a chill ran down my spine. There, lying on the floor in front of the window, was a figure, a woman. Her face was pale, eyes wide open, frozen in the same eerie expression I had seen through the window. She was dead. I stumbled back, heart racing. I had to get out of there. But before I could turn, I felt something cold brush against the back of my neck. Slowly, I turned around, and there, standing in the doorway, was the woman from the window. Her ghostly figure, with those same wide, unblinking eyes. Third story, the forgotten campsite. A few months ago, a group of friends and I decided to go camping deep in the woods. We were all nature enthusiasts, and we loved the idea of being off the grid for a few days. No phones, no work, just us in the wilderness. My friend Tom had heard about a secluded campsite in the mountains, one that was supposedly far away from any other campers or tourists. It sounded perfect. We set off early in the morning, excited for the trip ahead. After driving for hours, we finally reached the dirt road that led to the campsite. The place was remote, so remote that our GPS lost signal about halfway there. But we had a map and the directions Tom had written down, so we weren't too worried. As we ventured deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to grow taller and thicker, blocking out most of the sunlight. The dirt road became more rugged, barely wide enough for our car to pass through. After what felt like an eternity, we reached the spot Tom had described. It was a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, with a narrow river running nearby. There was no sign of anyone else. We had the place all to ourselves. After setting up our tents and starting a fire, we spent the evening telling stories, roasting marshmallows, and enjoying the peaceful silence of the woods. It was everything we had hoped for. But as the night wore on and the fire began to die down, the woods around us started to feel different. It was subtle at first, just an odd feeling that we weren't alone. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But the others felt it too. We all grew quieter, glancing into the dark woods surrounding our campsite. At one point, Tom got up to grab more firewood from the car, which was parked about 50 feet away, just outside the clearing. He hadn't been gone long when we heard him call out, "Hey, did you guys see someone over here?" We all froze. "What do you mean?" I shouted back, my heart starting to race. Tom returned to the campfire, his face pale. "I swear I saw someone standing near the car, like, just watching us." "You're messing with us," my friend Alex said, trying to laugh it off, but the tension in his voice was clear. Tom shook his head. "No, I'm serious. It was a figure, tall, standing by the trees. I thought it was one of you guys." We all exchanged uneasy glances. There was no one else out here. We had driven for miles through dense forest to get to this spot. The nearest town was at least 20 miles away. Trying to shake off the growing sense of dread, we decided to keep the fire going a little longer. But now, every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves made us jump. It felt like the woods were closing in on us, watching us. We couldn't see anything, but we could feel it. Around midnight, we decided to call it a night. Reluctantly, we retreated to our tents, trying to get some sleep. I lay there in the dark, listening to the sounds of the forest, trying to calm my nerves. But sleep wouldn't come. My mind kept replaying Tom's words, "I saw someone." A few hours later, just when I was about to drift off, I heard it. A faint, distant sound, like footsteps, crunching softly through the underbrush. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps grew closer, slow and deliberate, as if someone, or something, was walking around our campsite. I glanced at my tent zipper, praying it wouldn't move. My heart pounded in my chest as the footsteps stopped right outside my tent. I could hear breathing now, heavy, ragged breaths, just inches from where I lay. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping it would go away, hoping it was just an animal passing through. But then, I heard something even more chilling. A low, raspy voice, whispering from the other side of the tent wall. "I see you." My blood ran cold. I wanted to scream, to warn the others, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The voice continued, barely above a whisper, circling my tent. I see you. I see all of you. I heard a sudden rustling, and then the footsteps retreated, disappearing into the woods. For what felt like hours, I lay there, paralyzed with fear, waiting for it to return. But the forest had gone silent again. Not even the usual sounds of wildlife could be heard. Just an eerie, unnatural stillness. The next morning, I was the first to emerge from my tent. The others slowly followed, all of us looking like we hadn't slept a minute. Without saying much, we packed up our gear, eager to leave. As we loaded the car, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. In the dirt around our tents, there were footprints, large, human-like footprints, but they weren't from any of us. They circled around the campsite, stopping at each tent, just like the footsteps I had heard in the night. We didn't stick around to investigate further. We left the campsite as fast as we could, none of us speaking about what had happened. Even now, we don't talk about that night. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed in the middle of the night, I think about the voice, those chilling words that still echo in my mind. I see you.